It looks like we've got quite a few participants now, so I think it's probably a good time for us to start. So let me just start by introducing myself. My name's Vicky Mose. I'm Director of Global Products and Services at ABE. I've worked for ABE for a couple of years now, and my main role is to look at all of our products and all of our services and make sure that our customers have what they need. So this year we've started a series of workshops working with our academic team to bring centres and students, different aspects. So today's theme is writing a great assignment, an open book answer. And the reason for this workshop is we've had quite a lot of feedback from centres and students that they just want some additional ideas on, how to get from a pass to a merit or a merit to a distinction, and the key things that our academic teams see when they're marking these assignments and open book assessments, where students could possibly pick up additional marks or perform slightly better if they were just to apply a few different rules. So today the session is going to be run by Carrie Foster. Carrie is one of our chief examiners and has worked closely with ABE for a number of years. I'm going to hand you over to her to introduce herself because she can do a far better job than me. And then we'll just do a little bit of protocol before we get started into the session, and then we'll kick off with the session. Just to recap, we are being recorded. The slides will be available after the workshop, as will the recording, and we are currently live streaming on Facebook as well. I'll just hand you over to Carrie to introduce herself, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, my name is Carrie Foster and I am the Chief Examiner for the HR Suite at ABE. I call myself a woman of many businesses, which pretty much means I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I'm passionate about helping people be the best that they can be. And I get very excited about this type of subject because I know that if you just apply some of what we go through today, you'll be able to reach your full potential and get some really good grades. So I'll pass back to Vicky for protocols and then we'll get straight into it.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so the way that we'll operate today is Carrie's got a series of slides, and there's a number of different breaks in the slides where there's different sections. So what we will do is at the end of each section, we'll see if anybody's got any questions. So what I would ask is that if you can use the chat bar to type your questions into there, then when we get to the end of the section, we'll have a look at the chat bar, see if there's any questions. Jurga, who's in head office, you can't see her at the moment, she'll be able to unmute you if you want to ask a question directly. But it could be swifter if we look at your questions in the chat bar, and then Carrie will answer them from there. So that's how we're gonna run it today. So we will have plenty of breaks as we go through for you to ask questions, so you haven't got to save them all up until the end. So hopefully you'll enjoy the session, and I'll hand over to Carrie to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Hi. So the first thing just to say before we start is that often people talk to me about, oh, I'm losing marks in my assignment, and that's not how we approach marking at ABE. We have a range of marks that we can offer between 0 and 100. I'd love to give you 100 marks. All you need to do is give me a reason to give you a mark. So when I'm marking your assignments, I'm looking for any opportunity that I can to give you a big red tick and give you some marks which lead up to the next grade level. So this is all about how do you convince me to give you more marks, because that's what I want to do and that's what you want from me. So we're going to go through a couple of sections today. The first one is get the basics right, setting yourself up for success. We're going to have a look at the key words because it's really important, the command words in the question, to make sure that you deliver the right response to the question set. We're going to have a look at academic writing. It is a skill. You can learn to be more skilled and better at academic writing. We're going to look at how you can increase your grade level and go up from pass to a merit through to distinction and beyond. We're going to look at where do you get your evidence from, because that's really important. And the more research that you do, it demonstrated marking session after marking session that if more evidence you put in, the more marks that I can give you. How do you avoid academic malpractice? So don't throw away all that work that you've put in just by not getting it right. And then we'll sort of end on a quick summary. As Vicky says, I'll go through each section, then ask the questions and then move on. But just to let you know that some of the answers to your questions might come later on in the presentation. So let's start with the basics and getting the basics right. These are the things that, as a chief examiner, I find really frustrating, because you've got brilliant students who are working really, really hard, taking the effort of handing their assignment in or their OBE in on time, and then they get something so basic wrong. I can't mark your paper, or I can't pass you, and it's very frustrating from my point of view. And I'm sure if you've put all that work and effort in, it's very frustrating to end up not passing because of something that's very, very silly. So get these bits right, and you're setting yourself up for success. So first of all, in every paper we require an organisational summary. It's simple, do one. If you don't write an organisational summary, you will get an automatic fail. And what that means is I will look through your paper to see whether there is an organisational summary anywhere. And if there's not, I don't read the rest of the paper. I don't mark it, because it's an automatic fail. In the last marking session in June, I failed 2 papers purely because they didn't have an organisational summary. And it's such a ridiculous thing to not get a pass mark or to fail your paper on, because it's very brief. It's 200 words maximum. It tells you what we need from you. We need the name of your organisation, its size, some information about the market where it operates, examples of products and services, who the key competitors are, and the main customer segments. Now you might wonder, why is that a reason to fail a paper? Well, you will have noticed that all of our assignments and all of our open book exams are all about applying what you know to an organisational setting. So as an examiner, I need to know what the organisational setting is, so it makes sense to me when I'm reading your answers. You can include further information, but it's all about me understanding the context in which you're going to be setting your answers. So first rule, do one. Do an organisational summary. You must do one, otherwise you will automatically fail. The next is word count. Stick to it. Very simple rules. If you think writing reams and reams of paper will give you some kind of advantage, it doesn't. We stop marking after you reach the tolerance. So if it's 3,000 words as your word count limit, your submission can't be more than 3,300 words. We will stop marking after 3,300 words. I can instantly tell when I open up a paper whether someone has thought that adding lots and lots of writing is going to get them a better grade, because it's too long. There's too many pages. So don't write more than you need to. And I'm going to show you through this presentation how you can score lots of marks just by writing a couple of sentences and a few paragraphs. So you don't need to write reams, you just need to be very succinct in what you do write and writing the right things. So this will help you to do that. So don't write lots, stick to the word count, because once you reach it, we stop marking and there will be a line drawn and saying over the word count, and anything you've written after that we ignore, which may mean that you'll have tasks that will get no marks because you've already reached it in your first 2 tasks, and then you've lost your chance of passing the paper. Something that as the HR examiner, I've got a couple of modules where the grade marks are quite mixed, so they're not evenly spread. If a task says it's worth 10 marks out of 100, only give it 10% of your word count. Make sure you save your word count for high value mark questions. I have a paper where there's a 30 mark question and a 10 mark question, and very often students will write pages and pages and pages and write more for the 10 mark question than for the 30 mark question. And it's such a waste, because it means that you're actually losing the opportunity to gain more marks in the higher value question. And I just want you to keep this in mind as we go through today. assume that you have to make one mark-worthy point for every mark. So if it's a 10-mark question, assume you need to write 10 points that are worthy of me giving you a mark, or one of the other examiners or markers. Same with a 20-mark question, a 30-mark question. And if you think about it in that term, suddenly the allocation of your word count becomes really important. Okay, you want to have the word count to enable you to give me 30 mark-worthy points. And if you're using half of your word count on a 10-mark question, you are throwing away the opportunity to make those mark-worthy points elsewhere. So make sure you are clear on how many points are for each of the tasks. Usually they're split quite evenly, but there are a few papers where they're not. So there are some where you get 20 marks, 5 tasks, so that's easy, just split it by 5. But be very careful of how you're allocating your word count. Make sure that it's spread properly. Okay, read the question and follow instructions. The command question, the command word in the question is really important, and we will come on to that in one of the following sections. But make sure you respond to the question asked, not the one that you want to answer. Okay, don't just write around the topic. Oh, it's on, it's on management. I'll just write everything that I know about management for that question. It doesn't work like that. That's not how you score points. The questions drive the mark scheme, and the mark scheme is what we use to allocate marks to your script. So if you don't answer the question asked, we can't give you marks. You might write something that's totally brilliant, but if it's irrelevant to the question, I can't give you a mark for you. I have a paper where there was a question last time which was tell me about your skills. And that meant your skills, you as an individual, what are your skills that you contribute for teamwork, not skills in general. And nearly every paper was only getting 4 or 5 marks out of 20 because they were generalizing the skills and not talking about their skills. The student wasn't talking about their skills. And it's such a shame, because they were writing brilliant answers, but I couldn't allocate marks. Also, make sure you follow instructions. So if the question says no more than 8 slides for a presentation, don't do more than 8, because you won't get any marks for doing 10 or 20 or 30. You only get the marks for doing 8. It's part of the mark scheme. And make sure you stay within the framework of the question asked. You don't get marks for doing your own thing. So the questions are there for a reason, not just because we fancy writing a fancy question. They actually drive where the marks can be allocated. So read the question carefully and make sure you follow any instructions in the question. So if it says, give examples to illustrate your answer, give examples, because that's what we need to have in order to allocate marks to you. Okay, we've talked about the importance of organisational summary. I cannot emphasise enough how important applying your knowledge to your organisation is to you getting marks at ABE. Everything that we do is about you demonstrating your competence to be able to operate in your organisation. You're not doing these qualifications so you can say I've got a qualification and then not do anything with it. We want you to be able to do something with the knowledge and skills that you gain from our qualifications. That means you need to take the theories and think about how it applies to your organisation. So if you're answering a question on, for example, team dysfunction, make sure that you give me an example of conflict in your team, in your organisation, and then what happened and how you managed to fix that. Fundamentally, it's about the so what. You've read about all this stuff, you've learned about all this stuff in your lectures, and what we're interested in is not you regurgitating stuff that you've read. What we want you to demonstrate to us is that you can do something with the stuff that you've learned. So if a theory is true, how would that work in your organisation? If a framework that you've read about works, how would that work in your organisation? If you applied what you learned to your workplace setting, what difference would that make to your organisation? And that's what we want you to write about. Write about that, because that's where the marks flow really, really easily. If you start telling me about what's happening in your organisation and you pull in theory and go, well, you know, this theory does this, and then you pull it in to your organisation, that's where you really start totting up the marks. So apply to context. Everything needs to apply to your organisational content. Don't just write generally about stuff, because you don't get good marks for that. You'll get some marks, but if you want to move through the grade levels from pass to merit to distinction level, it's all about application. That's where the big money marks are. Please avoid theory dumps. First of all, we've written the papers, and some of us, including me, have written the study guides. So assume that we know the theory. You don't need to describe the theory to us unless the question asks for that specifically. I get, whenever I write a question that's about management, fails 14 principles of management. It doesn't get you a lot of marks, and it uses up valuable word count. So for example, there was a 20-mark question on principles of management on a paper that I had in the last session. And I got paper after paper that just told me, just described this theory to me. And the most marks that I could give for a really well described paper on or answer on this theory was 6 marks out of 20. And they'd done a lovely job. It was well described and it was in their own words, but that's not where the marks are. So assume that we know the theory, so you don't need to tell us the theory. We already know it, okay? What you want to do is take the relevant parts of the theory and apply it to your organisation. So answer the question in response to the command word, but put it in your organisational context. So use the theory, don't tell me about the theory. I already know it, as do the other examiners. Make sure, however, if you're using a theory, that you mention the theorist, the theory and the year. So Hackman 2002 5-factor model. That's pretty much all I need to know about a theory that you're applying. I don't need you to describe it. I just need you to indicate that you know that you're using this theory and that you're applying it to this context. And that is where the beauty of marks start totting up really quickly. So unless a question specifically asks you to describe a theory, don't. Okay, use the theory, because otherwise you will get TD written, which means theory dump. You'll get TD written on your paper in red ink, and it's just such a waste, because you obviously know the theory and that's lovely, but I can't give you more marks for telling me what the theory is. I can only give you more marks for applying the theory in context. Okay, so that's the end of getting the basics right. Have we got any questions? So I can't see the chat bar, Vicky. So do I end the show and then?
No. So I've made a note. I've made a note of the questions, and I can see the chat bar here. So we had one. Overall, somebody asked about if the slides are being shared. The answer to that is yes. They'll be shared after the session, as will the recording of the session. We had a question about tables and figures. Are they included in the word count? So I guess this is if they appear in assignments or open book assessments, because obviously they're slightly different. So that was one question.
Yes, they do. So thinking that if you put everything into a table, it doesn't count towards your word count doesn't work. You still tot up your word count very quickly. So tables can be a very good way of demonstrating information, but don't think that it hides the word count. There's still words in a table.
Vanessa asked that she thought the total word count for the organisational summary was 250, but we're saying 200. So I put in the chat bar that really look at the word count on the brief, because it might change from assignment to open book exam. So would you agree with that, Carrie?
Yeah, so I think the open book exam is 200 words.
Yeah.
But assignments might be 250. But basically write one.
Yeah.
And just have to write reams, just write one.
And always check the front of the brief, because that will give you a clear indicator of the number of words for that part. We also had a question about, can they use the same organisational summary? So say if they're doing an assignment and an open book, could they use the same organisational summary? So I think I know the answer to this, but yeah.
It's the same organisation, isn't it? So would the summary not be the same?
Yeah, yeah. So
you do get allocated marks for the summary, so it's not so much of an issue. But if you're doing an open book exam and you're doing an assignment maybe in 2 different modules, if you're using the same organisation, then I'm guessing the summary is going to be the same. It will be the same information, so that's fine.
Yeah. And all we say is just have a look at the overall brief as well. Make sure that organisation really lends itself to the unit you're doing, especially around something like project management, where you will need to define a project. It could be that some organisations make it easier to then answer the project related questions than others. So the answer is yes, but always check that it fits with the unit as well. Somebody's asked a question about the difference between merit and distinction, but you're going to talk about that a bit later on, aren't you? We'll save that question for later. And then there was another question: are intros and conclusions in assignments included in overall word count?
No. So your word count is for your task answers. So your introduction isn't, as long as the introduction is above where you've got task 1. If you include an introduction to each of the tasks, that would be included in your word count. And the same with the conclusion. If you do a conclusion at the end of your entire assignment that's outside of your tasks, then that's not included. If you conclude each task, that would be included in your word count.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. And then we've got, I think Shauna is asking, can definitions from the study guide? So I'm wondering I'm not sure can definitions be from the study guide? I'm wondering if that should say.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll come on to sources later as evidence, and how to deal with quotes and things like that. So the study guide is a source material. It is referenced. I like to think it's credible. So yes, the study guide is a source material that you can use.
We've got another question from Michael, who's asking, where do you mention the theorists when you're using theory? So I think you're going to come on to that as well,
yes,
Karen.
You will get copies of these slides, so don't panic, but I will actually help you understand how you introduce those kind of the theory and the date and the theorist with some words that you can use as well, so you can structure your sentences really well. You see, I really am determined to help you. Pretty much writing your sentences for you.
Everybody's really really concerned about the organisational summary, because I've had 4 questions about, so it is okay to use the same organisation for different open books?
Yes, that's all 4 questions, isn't it? Yes. You can use the same, if it's the same organisation, you can use the same organisational summary.
Yeah. Okay.
Not up for your own assignment. Don't take it from someone else's. Just because if your own organisational summary, if you use it in one module, if it's applicable to another module, you can use the same one. But please have one. That's the important thing about the organisational summary. Have one.
We've got a student asking, working with the government, I would have to make up a company and scenarios. So would you say to try and pick a local company that they would get access to, rather than making one up's never helpful, is it?
No, and it shows in the answers if someone's not really, if the organisation doesn't exist, it's hard to apply anything to something that doesn't exist. So if you're not able to talk about your own organisation, I would recommend studying an organisation, maybe with a friend or on your own, that you can use. So we do often get people writing about some of the bigger organisations in the world. It might be a big retailer, it might be a manufacturer, it might be, an industry that you feel that you could understand. but it is important to have an organizational context for a real organization, so you can actually write about it, because it does, you know, where people have tried that before, it does become quite obvious that they're just making it up as they go along, and that doesn't get you marks, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, last question in this round. We've got, do we have to specifically signify the task using the heading task 1? I guess this is for assignments, or any other relevant heading like characteristics of an effective team?
So in the open book exam, just fill in the bit underneath your task is written there. If you are writing assignments, it is really helpful to me as an examiner to know where one answer finishes and another answer begins. So yes, please put the question and the task and the question in, because that helps me know where your answer starts and finishes. I have had papers in the past that haven't, and I've kind of had to guess. I think this is where the next question starts. I've drawn a line and written task 2 in or whatever myself. That can create a bit of confusion because I'm trying to work out where your mark is. So yes, please put the task in. That really helps.
And then we've got one more. The students are not explaining about the theory. A brief introduction of what the theory is okay, question mark, in order to apply the chosen organisation. I think we're going to come on to theory and application in the next part, aren't we, Carrie?
I wouldn't even waste your word count on a huge amount of explanation or introduction. Just mention the theory so I know that that's what you're applying. If you apply it well, it will be obvious that you're applying it. But don't waste your word count. Some of these questions, you've got 600 words to write your answer in. If you use 150 words introducing something that I know about already, I might be able to give you a mark, but that's 150 words gone from your ability to give me a reason to give you more marks. So don't waste your word count on explaining something you don't need to. Unless it tells you. If it tells you to describe the theory, use your word count for it. Otherwise, don't. Just mention it in passing and apply it.
I think that's all the questions for now, Carrie. So we can crack on to the next section.
Okay, so keywords, understanding command words. Now, until I became an academic myself and started marking and writing papers, I don't think I really understood that there was a huge difference between keywords. But I'm using an example throughout all of this now, and I can't cover the entire suite of command words. So I've chosen the ones that I think come up pretty much in every paper, just to demonstrate to you how a topic changes, so the information that you put into your answer changes based on the command word. So I've chosen COVID-19 just because it's all a shared experience and we all know what it is, so I don't have to explain it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the kind of key command words, kind of the popular ones that I've chosen, explain what it is, and then demonstrate to you what difference that does in terms of what information you'd put into an answer. So the first one is analyze. I have done this alphabetically. So the word analyze comes up. Analyze something. So analyze COVID is the question. That's it. Analyze COVID. Analyze is all about selecting relevant information, having the components of that information separated, talking about characteristics of the information, whatever the topic is, and then making links between different sources of information. And it's all about identifying cause and effect. So if we look on the right-hand side, analyze COVID-19. We want a little bit of brief background. COVID-19 is. It's an airborne disease. It's highly contagious. And here are some symptoms. So these are the component parts: cough, fever, loss of smell. Okay. And then we're going to talk about, well, what are some of those responses to COVID-19? Social distancing, wearing masks, track and trace. Easy enough, right? So analyze is all about going into the component parts, really digging down into, well, if we're talking about COVID-19 or whatever your topic is, these are the little bits of it that are relevant from your perspective. If we then look at compare COVID-19, so change of command word, same topic. Compare is all about similarities and differences. And it's about identifying and explaining those similarities of two or more concepts, explaining the differences and demonstrating your understanding. So compare COVID-19 is completely different to analyse COVID-19. You can see here what it is, brief background. Then we start talking about Spanish flu, which was the 1918 pandemic, a little bit of a brief background of that. Let's compare infection rates. Let's compare fatality rates. Let's compare treatment rates. And let's look at some of the factors around the differences between two pandemics: healthcare, social factors, government action, and globalization. So you can instantly see, just by changing the command word, the information that you're expected to provide changes dramatically. And I'll just go back to analyze. You can see we were talking about COVID-19 2020 version, some stuff around the symptoms, some stuff about some of the things that we do to avoid it. But when we're comparing COVID-19, completely different set of information. So this is why the command word and paying attention to the command word is really important, because this is where your marks are. It's not about a general, I'll throw everything that I know about the topic at the answer to the task. It's actually about taking the right information and writing about that in response to whatever the question is. To give you an example of describe is about setting out the characteristics, making links, and then maybe an explanation or a justification at the end. And that's really important, that you put something at the end that looks at explaining why we are where we are. So describe COVID-19. It's a coronavirus. Where was it from? How did it progress around the world? What the World Health Organization did, the global pandemic, moving from an epidemic to a pandemic. What were your government's responses? And then the justification or explanation, what now and what next? So you can see again, completely different set of information. In analyze and compare, didn't even mention the World Health Organization. Okay, we might have talked a bit about a government response, but not at this level. We wouldn't have described it. So you can start seeing these command words, how important that they are. Now, there are lists available. ABE has provided the information that I've got on the left-hand side comes directly from ABE's command word list. So this isn't telling you anything new. This is on the list that's available on the intranet. Then we have discuss. Okay, discuss is about testing out different ideas or strengths and weaknesses of an idea, making links, and taking account of different opinions. So again, discuss COVID-19. So brief background, lockdown and quarantine, New Zealand versus Sweden. If it was an organisational context, you'd talk about, you know, my organisation versus another organisation. And then you'd explore some of the advantages and disadvantages, some of the strengths and weaknesses for and against. Social distancing, should it be 2 meters, 1 meters, no meter at all? For and against each one of those options. Wearing a mask, for and against. The culture war, hoax or a real health crisis. And then looking at what next. So what comes next? So you can see, again, new information in here that we haven't mentioned in any other of the other command word responses to COVID-19. Hopefully this is really opening your eyes up to how important command words are. Let's talk about explain. So this is about the causes of something, making sure that you state your points very clearly, addressing the question, some element of reasoning and justification, and examples that you put in here. So explain COVID-19, what it is, the background, the spread of the virus from epidemic to pandemic, how it progressed. So example, what happened in Wuhan, the spread to Asia, the response of different countries to the virus, what they did differently and the outcomes. For example, you might choose what happened in Malaysia, could be in the UK, it could be in France, it could be anywhere, but what happened. And the role of the World Health Organization, what they did and what they are doing, and examples of their role in warning the world that this pandemic was coming. Again, whole different suite of information. And even though we've got the World Health Organization coming in, it's actually looking at it from a different angle in terms of its role in warning the world about this disease. And then we have evaluate. So this is making a judgment from available evidence. Really important, that word. You're expected to make a judgment at the end of your answer. So reviewing information, considering options, taking into account different factors, and we'll come on into different voices and how you bring those in, using available knowledge, experience and evidence, and making a supported evidence-based judgment. So COVID-19, evaluate COVID-19. What were its origins? Was it a wet market in China versus man-made? Your judgment, agree or disagree based on the evidence in the first bit. The search for a vaccine, how long will it be? Will it work? Make a judgment, tell me. And learn to live with the virus, pros and cons, and make a judgment whether you agree or disagree with that. That evaluation really does rely on you making an evidence-based judgment. If you're not putting that into an evaluate question, you're not evaluating, you're describing or discussing. Now, if you're level 6 and some level 5s, but definitely at level 6, you'll start seeing this word critically evaluate or critically assess, critically analyse. And it's inviting you to examine the issue from a point of view of a critic, hence the word critically. So there's a lot more depth to it. It requires you to make sure you provide supporting details, hence why this is at level 6. You need to apply the theory and you focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the points of views that you're presenting as your evidence. And it's asking you to challenge conventional thinking. So this is about, so critically evaluate COVID-19, the search for a vaccine, the political motivation for an early vaccine, politicians' push for a vaccine, damage to the economy versus preserving health, anti-vaccine sentiment, trust in a vaccine. Then you go to the scientific angle of how vaccines are usually produced. What's the difficulty for a coronavirus vaccine? Different strains of COVID-19. Will it just mutate? Provide some evidence. And then talk about the pros and cons of pushing through a vaccine quickly. Even if we get a vaccine, can we vaccinate the world and how long will it take? And maybe some lessons from 1918, or will it just go away? And then finally, that evaluation requires that judgment. So it's a critical evaluation based on everything that you know. So that critically question, that word in your command word structure of a question, and it does come in at level 6. So if you're doing level 4, don't worry about it yet. But if you're in those later papers, this is the kind of depth that you need to go into and be thinking about. Okay, so that's command words. What are the questions, Vicky? Oh, you're on mute.
I did it, didn't I? Has to happen every session. You're on mute. We just had one around the slide you showed for describe. It says you mentioned that a justification and explanation might be good at the end, but the slide text shows a contradiction. I think we're just a bit confused. So
okay, so I'm not too sure what the contradiction is. The what now, what next is the explanation or justification. So it might be a justification of the government responses or what's happened in the background. So it's just kind of going into that little bit more. So I've told you loads of stuff, but here's what it means, what this means to. So if certainly in an organisational context, you might describe something. So for example, say it was about the importance of team working in the organisation, and you'll describe what team working is. You'll describe why it's really important and the impact of good team working. And then right at the end, you'll add a sentence or 2 sentences to say, and this is really important to my organisation because, pulling on what you've spoken about before. Yeah. So that's where the what now and what next, what they should be doing. And to make team working happen more, they should be doing X, Y, and Z. So it's just that final sentence or sentences where you bring in that explanation or justification.
Yeah, okay.
Does that answer the question? If not, I'll try again.
No, I think so. I think because it does say on the slide, do not need to include justification or explanation.
Yeah.
So I guess it was just that having that little bit more detail, they felt that maybe it was a justification or an explanation. So
Yeah, it just helps describe
yeah.
what you're organized. So that's the apply part of describe. Describe is it's how would my organization do this then?
Yeah.
Describe what that means and what next for your organization. So
And
hopefully you can see, guys, that command words aren't just how do I start my question? what word shall I use to start this question that's different from a different one? They're actually there for a reason. We choose the command words specifically because we have in mind the type of information that we want you to provide to us so we can give you marks. But they actually drive the way that you will structure your question and what information within the topic you need to be providing to us in order to get good marks. Okay, and is that it? Is that all the questions?
the only other question was one around, will you be able to show us how to do an introduction and conclusion? But I don't think this session stretches that.
I don't cover that, but I'm happy to cover that off separately if I can maybe write something you can share, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's it.
So, academic writing. It is a skill, which is good because you can learn a skill. I like things that I can learn. So what you'll find as you go through the different module levels, if you start at level 4 and work your way up, level 5, level 6, you will be developing your academic writing skills, maybe not even realizing you're doing it, but it is something that you can develop and get better at. So this section is all about how can you earn Uber marks for doing as little writing as possible by making sure you write in a way that is the way we expect you to write as an academic. Okay, so that's what this is about. This is all about gaining lots of marks for not writing very much. We like that. Okay, so I want you to think about, if you see your newsreader, the 10 o'clock news, we have the 10 o'clock news in the UK, but if you have your newsreader giving you the news, he or she will start with the headlines. So we have Big Ben bonging at 10 o'clock, bong, headline, okay? You might not have that where you are, but they'll give you a load of headlines of the top line, you know, a couple of sentences about the top news for the day. So if you're in America, it will be Trump's taxes written about by New York Times, and they'll give you the headline for the day. Then they will go in, after they've done the headlines, they will go into one of the stories and they will bring in some people who've got an opinion. So they'll bring in one person. So we've got Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's made an announcement and they'll bring in a voice, somebody who's got something to say about whatever it is that Boris has said. They will then bring in someone else who's got something else to say. So you might have someone who agrees with what he said and someone who doesn't, and then they'll have a little bit of a bun fight. Okay, they'll argue about it and they'll put their points of view across. Okay, and then at the end, the newsreader will summarize the story, whatever it is. That basically is what academic writing is all about. It's about giving a headline, bringing in voices, having a little bit of an argument, and then summarizing at the end. So how do we do that? First of all, start with a headline. Okay, introduce the subject of your argument you want to make as a statement. If possible, so thinking about your theorist, you might have references of people who have also made this point. So Hackman 2002 said ... Okay, so you introduce your headline, your argument. Tick 1 mark already just for giving me your headline. That's a sentence, maybe 2 sentences at most, a headline. Then you bring in supporting evidence. This is your voice coming in, who will provide further support from academic sources, and they're adding meat to the bone. So your headline is like a skinny bone, and you want to give some filling to that, add some meat to that, so that you can back up whatever argument you've already put. So you add to what's already been said, maybe by bringing in a different voice or adding a bit more information. Okay, tick. 2nd mark already. You've only written 3-4 sentences. Fantastic. Then you bring in the critique. So as an academic, you're actually an objective observer. So that means you need to bring in both sides of the argument. You need to bring in this person and that person to have a little bit of an argument. So you need to find the person who says the opposite of what you've already just said. And you might say that this argument assumes, or it claims that, or it could be asserted. So you might bring in another theorist who says, well, Hackman says this, but Belbin says that. But you might just go, well, so-and-so said Hackman says this, but that argument that they're making assumes this is happening or that is happening. Okay, so it's important that you show the other side, the opposing argument, to show that you've considered both sides of the argument. So you put your point, the point of view, the argument that you're putting in, one point of view, and then you bring in the other point of view. And that shows that you've got some supporting evidence to show you've thought about this from both sides. Tick, possibly 2 ticks for that. Okay, so you've already got up to at least 3 marks, possibly even 4. Then you bring in your counter critique. Well, it's saying, yes, but. Okay, well, we said that, you said that, but in support of our first argument, or it strengthens the second argument, it's the however. Nevertheless, nonetheless, despite, although, however, here's some more information that I can give you that supports the argument or supports the critique of the argument. Okay, so it's more evidence. It's more evidence that you know what you're talking about. And then finally, you end with a critical judgment. So based on everything that you've just written, headline, evidence, critique, counter critique, based on that, what's the point that you're making? What's your summary of all those arguments? It could be argued that, ... 5 marks. Now that's a paragraph, 150 words. You can write an argument like that in 150 words, possibly less if you're very succinct and it's not a very long argument. Okay, so when we start talking about word count, if you've got 600 words, 20-mark question, you need 4 arguments and 4 of this kind of structure in your answer. Okay, so just to go through again: headline, what's the argument you're making? Supporting evidence, who else has said what you're saying? Who said something different to what you're saying? The critique. Who said something else? The counter critique. And then, so what? So what does that mean? What's the argument that you're making? It's a very simple structure, but if you stick to that structure in very few words, a paragraph, you can get at least 5 marks just by doing one of each of those things in 150 words. 15 words for each sentence. Yeah, fantastic. And that's where you can really get the money. That's the money maker, is the academic argument. So, do you want me to go through that again, is the first question, because I rattled through that. Mute.
Nobody's saying yes or no at the moment. We've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
They're not directly related to this bit, so kind of come in just after. It says, can we write about a project that's already happened and discuss what strategies should have been used? I think that's probably come up from when I was talking about the organisational summary and making sure it was right for the type of unit, and gave an example of project management.
Again, this comes to the question that is asked. So if it is asking projects generally, then I don't see that there's a problem with using a past project. But if the question, or if the instructions for the paper and the questions are specifically about a new project or a project that you need to start, then the answer to that is no. You need to follow the instructions on the paper. So the true answer to that question is depends. It depends on the instructions and it depends on the question. I certainly, in terms of marking some of the HR papers, don't have a problem at all with people talking about something that's happened in the past as an example, And I would be delighted to award lots of marks for, and here's things that we could have done better if it happened again. But that's because of the nature of the questions within the HR suite. But within project management, it will depend on the instructions on the paper.
Okay. The other one is, can you give us some tips for open book exams and research info in advance? I mean, we've got a guide to writing open book exams, but I don't know if that question is more about the research side of it and how to sort of, you know, have successful research, I guess, without looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, so I will be coming on to sources. So maybe that will be covered in the where do you get your evidence from section, I think.
And we've had, actually, Carrie, we've had quite a lot of requests for you to go over academic writing, and in particular, the counter critique was a little bit confusing. Okay. Hang on a minute, let me just check if there was any other. This is great, this chat bar. I'm loving this. I'm feeling like your PA. Okay, so okay. Yeah, no, that seemed to be the bit, but they said, yeah, if we could go over it one more time, and I think it is a pretty important area. So roll again, Carrie.
No, here we go. Hopefully I'll get it better this time. Imagine you're a newsreader. That's the first bit. So this is how it goes. You start off with your headline news. Okay, what's the statement that making, whatever the theme is, it doesn't matter what the topic is, what's the point that you're making? So in HR, if you're talking about employee engagement, you might be talking about the difference between employee engagement and the importance of employee voice. So that might be your headline. Employee voice is really important, headline topic. To prove that employee voice is really important to organisational development or whatever it is, you'll bring in some supporting evidence. And I like to think about that as bringing in another voice, another person, your evidence from academic research. So this might be a theorist, it might be someone who's written a paper about it, it might even come out of the study guide. Foster, I don't know when the study guides were written, 2019 or whatever, Foster 2019 says, and this is what I say, okay? So that's the supporting evidence. You start off with your argument, whatever it is that you're talking about. This is the point I'm making, tick mark, that's relevant to the question. This is how that point is supported with some evidence from a journal, from an article, or from a textbook or study guide. Okay, so this is someone else who said that, whatever I've said. Okay, then you will bring in someone who will disagree with whatever you've just said. Okay, so you have to disagree with yourself. So if you think about, when you get the two politicians, left and right, having an argument on the news program, that's what it is. You've brought in the person who supports whatever you've just said, and now you're bringing in the person who doesn't agree with what you've said, okay? And they're giving their point of view, a different perspective to what you've just said, okay? You're wrong because, okay? Whatever it is that kind of gives another side to the story. The counter critique is a third voice. Okay, so you've got 1, 2, and then you bring in a third in the middle. I haven't got enough hands for that. Okay, you bring in a third voice. Now that third voice might agree with the original point that you were making. It might support what you've already said. It might support the disagreement. It might go over to the other side, or it might bring in something completely different, a third perspective, the third way of looking at whatever it is that you're discussing. So if you think about employee voice, you might bring in some information from Armstrong. Michael Armstrong is an HR theorist, so you might bring in something from Armstrong. You might then come in and introduce something from Drucker, who disagrees with what Armstrong says. And then you'd bring in a third person, Littler, who has something completely different to say about it, or agrees with Armstrong, or agrees with Drucker. Okay, doesn't matter as long as you're bringing in all this evidence to build to the point that you want to make. And then you end up with, based on this little argument that we've had between the three voices, I'm going to tell you what I think now. This is what I'm going to sum it all up and say, but this is what I think. Yeah, it could be argued as. Does that make sense? Have I managed to do it this time? Is that clearer? I should have brought puppets. Yeah, okay. You're still on mute.
So yeah, you've got the thumbs up, Carrie.
Great. Okay, yeah. Fabulous. So that structure, think of it as a structure. If that's what you need to bring in, sentence on this, sentence on that, sentence on that, on one or two sentences. That's 5 marks at least, just by doing that. 5 marks at least, just by doing that. If you get some really juicy information in there, you might pick up a couple more marks as well. But it's just showing the breadth of your understanding of the information that you're presenting. So let's talk about, now we've got our little framework of academic writing. That's what academic writing is all about. How do you increase your grade level and what makes a good academic argument?
Carrie, just before we go on, there was one question saying, so does it mean that no matter what the command word, we should follow academic writing, or do we need to use this writing style if we get critically evaluate, describe, analyze as command words?
Okay, so the information that you include, so you start off with your topic, whatever the topic will say, employee engagement, because it's from my suite of things. So you get your topic, employee engagement. Your command word will determine what information about employee engagement, or whatever your topic is, that you're going to include in your answer. Okay, so if we go back to my command words here, discuss, it's the right hand side column, what it is, the lockdown, if it's discussed, if it's explained, it's different information that you'll be bringing in. And what you'll see is, say for example, so I'll stay on explain. So think about this in terms of your academic argument. So you have your background, you just do a little bit so I know that you know what COVID is. And then your first headline is the spread of the virus. That's your first headline. And what you'll do is you'll bring in different voices and you'll have your examples, because explain needs to have examples in it. Your second headline, academic writing, is the response of different countries to the virus, what they did differently and the outcomes, and then what happened, and you'll bring in different voices. Okay, and your third headline, academic writing, is the role of who, what they did and what they're doing. Okay, if I then take that academic writing to evaluate, different question, first headline, what were its origins? That's your first headline, and I'd bring in some information about wet markets, man-made, agree or disagree, have dissenting voices, counter critiques. Second headline, the search for a vaccine. Then you've got your different points of view, and learning to live with the virus is your third headline under evaluate COVID. Does that help if I break it down by the academic writing? So those topics, that information that comes from the topic based on the command word becomes your headlines. Okay, and your headlines then build towards your academic writing. Everyone clear? Or have I just muddied the water?
Look.
How are we doing? Have we got any thumbs up or just heads exploding?
We've got nothing at the moment.
Okay, so quick, move on.
It says the water is clearer.
Yes.
Yes.
Fabulous. That's great. Yes. It all been
so far. A smiley face from Sanju who asked the question. So
fantastic.
Yeah, take that.
Okay. Good. Okay. So if you think about it, and you'll have these slides, if you think about your headlines as that information, each section is an academic writing headline. Okay, so how do you increase your grade level? What makes a good academic argument? So again, using COVID-19, because it's a shared experience, it doesn't matter what module you're doing, we all know what we're talking about. What takes you from a pass mark or a failure to a pass mark, which is 40 marks. If you get 40 marks, you're over the line, you've passed, fantastic. If you get 55 marks, you're into a merit, which is fabulous. And then if you get 70, pop open the champagne, or however you wish to celebrate, get your big chocolate bar out or have a boogie, because you are an academic star and you're moving into distinction territory. But what's the difference? How does it matter? Well, if your academic writing is poor and you're not giving me anything that I can award marks for, you're in the poor category, under 40 marks. And that's where you're missing really important information. So just to give you an example, again, using COVID, because it's simple, there was a virus. Yep, great. Doesn't really tell me a lot, and I'm not sure you actually understand much about the subject. Okay, then we move into the pass. It's great. Passing is really good. That's not a bad thing, but you've moved into the pass, so fabulous. There was a pandemic. It was caused by a virus. A lot of people got sick and died. It's correct, and what you've written is good, but it's quite descriptive, and it kind of doesn't get into the nitty-gritty, and you may have some answers which aren't replying to your command words. So you might just get into that 40 marks, but you may not be given, breaking down your command words correctly and bringing in enough kind of detail that we need, and enough of that kind of evaluate, explain, discuss, whatever we've asked you to do. A better mark, which is your 41 to 50 marks, there's some form of evaluation in there. You're starting to bring in some more information. You're giving the command word what we're asking for to a degree. So there was a global pandemic caused by a virus called COVID-19. A lot of people got sick and died, and this is what the government is doing about it. So here's a bit more information. It's that bit more information that takes you up those marks. And I can start awarding more, giving you more marks, because you're giving me more to mark, which is good. Getting into kind of merit territory now, where you've got this evaluative approach. The risk of a global pandemic was caused by coronavirus. It was predicted, so you're bringing in a bit more information. The 2020 pandemic was caused by COVID-19, highly infectious. The R rate, the fact that it spread really quickly, and then reactions to the event. So you're bringing in some more evidence, so getting into that kind of evidence critique, counter critique. If you're bringing that into your paper, then you're moving into merit territory automatically. So just using that structure brings you into that kind of lovely merit territory. If you do a little bit more and you're kind of in the awesome stage of 61 to 70 marks, so you're moving up towards distinction now, you're bringing in some of that criticality. So a dynamic global economy and high transmission rates cause the rapid spread of this highly infectious disease, and reactions and possible solutions. So you're bringing in more voices, more evidence, okay? And then, woohoo, distinction, get out the chocolate bar, go and take a bow. So why the causes of the pandemic are not going to be solved by the development of a vaccine. Wow, wouldn't that be interesting to read about that? Completely different perspective. It's moved completely away from just being descriptive to actually bringing some analysis and evaluation that's kind of original. And it's like, ooh, that's interesting. That's going to make me sit up and go, that's interesting. And then talking about how tackling poverty and public health can prevent future pandemics with recommendations. So you can see again the range of kind of analysis and thoughtfulness that goes into the answers you provide, not just regurgitating whatever it is that you've read, but actually thinking about what you've read brings you into that distinction territory. Okay, so that's how the different grade levels work and how you bump up those 10-mark blocks. Any questions? Hopefully I've answered the question about what the difference is between a merit and a distinction.
Okay, so we've got, this is a Facebook question. Regarding the recommendation for the academic star, you expect it to be in the task-wise content or at the end of all the tasks before the conclusion?
That's in the task-wide content. So your approach to answering the task is both original and gives a critical analysis. Now, original doesn't mean you need to be the first person that ever thought of it, but it just means that the way that you've approached answering the question isn't, the standard answer. So if I've got my mark scheme, which asks for certain things, if you've done all of that, but actually you've approached it from a really original, wow, that's a really good thought, that's a really good point that you've made, then that's when you're getting into the distinction level, where it's really high level thinking, and you're demonstrating your kudos as an academic. It's not the reason why people don't get lots of we don't have lots of people with distinctions, is that's quite a high level of thinking to get to for anybody. This isn't just about, oh, we have to be super academic, but it's really about approaching the topic and the task that's been set from a slightly different perspective, to seeing it through a different lens that's really interesting, well thought through, evidenced, not just random thoughts, but evidenced, and gives a really nice thought process. So you can see up until distinction level, it's all approaching it from the kind of COVID is this, COVID is that, these are things that we can do, these are ideas that are out there. But what the academic star is doing is actually going, yeah, but let's look at it from the point of view of developing a vaccine, and that's not going to help us solve this problem. So it's actually looking at COVID as a societal problem rather than as a disease that needs solving. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, so somebody's asked a question, is how would the financial modules adopt into this approach structure? They're still open book exams, so for me, I would say it's around looking at the questions, and it's the amount of content and the way that you answer, so that it's not brief, it's as you've described, it's pulling on more examples. So regardless of the topic, it's about applying it to that particular area, I would say.
So some of the financial questions they're either right or wrong. If you've answered the question that's about a sum, if you like, a financial calculation, then you can't do that with this. But if you get full marks, that's a distinction level. Full marks is full marks. But there are questions within the financial modules which actually ask you to think like this and think a little bit differently, because you're asked to give reasons, or you're asked to justify or explain why you would take one decision rather than a different decision based on the numbers that you've got in front of you. And that's where you can start bringing some of this thinking in. Okay.
Yep. Oh, somebody's asked about level 3, Carrie.
Oh yes, same applies for level 3.
Yeah, but obviously the word count is less. So
yes.
Yeah, it's in relative to word count. What's we got here?
If you were doing this at level 3, you'd be off the charts. You'd be doing very well to do this at level 3. I think a lot of the questions in level 3 are around describe anyway, so the command words are pushing you towards describe. So
we've got a question here. If you want to reference from a site that gives you reviews or research ed information on a topic, but it has no author, can we use it? This is for level 5.
If it doesn't have an author, I'm not sure how you'd quote it.
No.
And I'll come on to evidence and credible sources, and that will answer that question.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay. And that is where we're at, actually. So gathering evidence, exploring all the sides of the answer. Okay, so where do you get these heads, these three people, these 3 voices that have something to say? Well, the important thing with any sources, and this is true of anything in your life. We're hopefully helping you to become critical thinkers and think about where you get your information. So where you get your information is really important. So you can see I've got the kind of the green ticks, those should be your sources, and the red crosses, don't use these as sources. They're not credible sources of evidence. So credibility is really important. ABE study guide does meet the criteria of being credible and reliable. Journals, now you might not always be able to get hold of the journals that you want, but there are now a huge amount of sites that do open source journals. I know you have access to Emerald. Google Scholar as well is a free source. Now, some of the journals are a bit older, but they can lead you to open source areas for newer papers, newer writing. And it also does the citations for you, so you don't have to worry about how you're referencing, because it tells you how to do it, which is brilliant. You can just copy and paste your citations from Google Scholar. So journals are really good, peer-reviewed journals. Industry magazines can be used. Published reports or research, you might have white papers, and any publications by your organisation as well, especially if you're making reference to applying to the organisation. Well, you know, especially, so I have a question on one of my papers, which is around the benefits of team working, collaborative team working in the organisation. If you were to quote stuff from your organisation's annual accounts as to how profits have gone up as a result of collaborative team working, I would be delighted. And that's really good use of that sort of information. And textbooks or academic books. What aren't credible sources are Wikipedia. And the reason is because anyone can write a Wikipedia page, so you don't know how accurate it is. Wikipedia can be useful as a kind of a who should I be reading about and what journals should I be looking at as a kind of a start point of your research, but I definitely wouldn't be quoting Wikipedia in any of my papers. Facebook, not credible. You don't know where the information, even if you were reading an article that's on Facebook, it's not necessarily credible. You don't know where it's come from and you don't know who they're trying to persuade. Anything out of date. Now, you do have what's called seminal works, and that's your theorists whose theory you're quoting. They are seminal works, so you can quote from seminal works that are older than 10 years old, but anything that's kind of a general industry magazine or a research report, especially survey results, if you're talking about surveys about employee engagement, if it's more than a couple of years old, it's kind of a bit outdated and may not apply anymore. Any research articles that you have that don't have sources can't really be research articles, they're opinion pieces. So blogs and opinion pieces don't do. You need to make sure that they've got sources, that they've got references in that they're using throughout. Websites depends. Some websites are more credible than others. So if it's a major news outlet, something like Harvard or Oxford, something like that, so some of the kind of academic websites, that's fine if it's got an author. So you need to be able to quote the author and the date of whatever article you're reading, but try and keep that to the minimum because they're not necessarily credible. They might be opinion pieces. And please don't quote your friends, your family or your colleagues' opinion, because they're not relevant. They're not published. They might have published a book, use their book, but don't quote a friend. My friend said isn't a great source. So you need to think about the sources. And the reason is it's about reliability. So what are the qualifications of the person who's writing it? It's quite interesting at the moment with lots of people with no medical degrees who are giving opinions about the current situation in the world. It's like, but what's your qualification to be saying that? Listen to the people with the qualifications. You can disagree with them, but make sure they're reliable. Make sure that the sources are listed. So is there a reference list or bibliography? If there is, you're good to go. Peer-reviewed journals are brilliant because that means other people have looked at the work and made comment, and edits have been made as a result. Think about who the target audience is. So one of the interesting things we find in the world today is very biased perspectives that give you one point of view, and it's aimed at people who already share that point of view, that kind of, you know, information bubble that we find ourselves in. Make sure that you check out who the target audience is. What's the purpose of the source? Is it to influence? Is it to critique? Is it to damage? Why does the source exist in the first place? And when was it published? So is it recency? How recent something is really important. But there is an exception for seminal texts. So if you're, you know, talking about management theory and talking about scientific theory, it's perfectly okay to be talking about Frederick Taylor 1918, but as long as you talk about the evolution of management a bit further down the line. But it's okay to have seminal texts, but try and keep recency in mind. So how recent is it? That can often be hard to get hold of. You might not have access to all of this, but try and keep things up to date as possible with your references. Try to use journal articles. And as I say, there is a huge move in the academic world towards open source. So there's a lot more journals available than there used to be, you know, even if you go back 2 or 3 years ago. So make use of them, and then any resources that are provided for you. And then this is something that, how do you read a journal article? Because they can be quite boring, to be honest. Some of them, just being honest, they can be quite boring, journal articles. But what you want to do is, I actually have, when I'm doing research, I have a little table. I have a Word document where I have these questions on there to help me think about what I'm reading. So whether you're reading the study guide or reading a journal article or a magazine article, have these questions when you're reading. What's the main purpose? What's this article there for? What was the author's reason for writing the article, as much as you can glean from what you've read? What are the key questions that the author is addressing? So what are the questions that you think the author is trying to answer in writing the article? As you read through, what are the questions? What's the important information? So what are some of the key points that you've picked out as really important information? That might be facts, it might be observations, it might be data, especially if it's a research or survey article. You can bring out some data that's important. Main inferences and conclusions. So what are the conclusions that the author presents? So this is what they've said, they're concluding. And guess what? You find that in the section that says conclusions. So that's where you find that information. And then what you need to do is then sit back, having read that and answered those questions, and think about, if I agree with what the author's just said, the conclusions that the author's drawn, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? What are the consequences to my organisation if I follow what the author has said, if I take that reasoning seriously? And to give you a really silly example, just to explain what that might look like, you might read an article that says, I've done some research and I want to find out what colour swans are. And through my research, I've discovered that all swans that I've observed are black. Okay, all swans are black. Now, if you know anything about nature, you know that's not true. But that question, if we take the line of reasoning that all swans are black is true, what does that mean? Well, that means that any white swans are a figment of your imagination. White swans are mythical creatures, and any swan that is not black is not real. Now, obviously, we know that not to be true, but in your thinking about what you've just read, you need to follow that path of going, well, if this is true, if what the author says as concluded in answer to their question is true, what does that mean? Okay, and it's a silly example, but it's a really good demonstration of following this path of, well, if that's true, what does that mean? And for ABE specifically, what does that mean for my organisation? What does that mean in the context of my organisation and my workplace? What does that mean? Okay, and that's what we're really interested in. Another important point, don't quote, synthesize. Now, I write this occasionally on people's papers, synthesize, exclamation marks. You don't get marks for filling a paper with what other people have said. So I have seen papers where the entire paper is made up of quotes. There's nothing in between. It's just quote, 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 quote. Now, it's great that they've done the research, but I can't give you lots of marks for telling me what someone else has said, their voice. It's better for you to synthesize what's been said, to write it in your own words. Read what you've read, take all your reading and your evidence, and then go, how would I explain that to someone else? And write it like that. If you can't say it any better, if there's no way of saying the point any better than someone who said it before, then use a quote. That's when you use a quote and cite it. Okay, make sure you put, Hackman 2002, whatever it is, whoever it was, and the date. Okay, but first of all, try and make the point in your own words, and you may add a citation where you say Hackman says, but you say what he said in your own words. You paraphrase it, you put it in your own words. And in that way, you're supporting the point that you make and incorporating ideas in your own words, and you're presenting new ideas because you're interpreting what you've read. You can involve more than one source, so you can bring in different voices. You can compare different materials. You can highlight the similarities and differences, and you can make connections. What you're not doing is just repeating verbatim what someone else has said, okay, which I can't give you loads of marks for. But if you synthesize this stuff here, the presenting new ideas, involving more than one source, comparing different material, that is all stuff that I can give you loads of marks for. I can award marks willy-nilly if you do this. So synthesizing, not quoting, is really important when you're looking at sources. So here's something to help you. Well, how do I do that? How do I bring in, making sure that I evidence that I know the voice, who said it, but how do I evidence it and make sure that I'm bringing it in? So if you can't think of a person or can't find the evidence in your research of an opposing opinion, so thinking about your critique and your counter critique, okay, here's the structure. It may be argued that, whatever the point is that you're making, however, another point, critique, okay? It could be contended that, point of view, however, counter critique, okay? So I've even given you the sentence structure for how you can put your evidence and your critique in, okay? If you haven't got the research, you've read widely, and these are the thoughts that you're sharing, but you're aware of opposing opinions. When you've seen an opposing opinion written in another text, brilliant, bring it in and cite them. So it has been argued by the person in 2018 that, whatever point you're making, however, and then you can bring in another theorist, another date, says or asserted or claimed X, Y, and Z. So this is how you bring in your critique and your counter critique. So thinking about your academic writing structure, this is how you do it. These are the words that you can use to do that and how you bring in that evidence. And then when you've seen an opposing opinion written in another text, you could say it has been argued by theorist that, however, and then you can bring in theorist 2019 maintains that X, Y, and Z, however. Yeah, so you can see how very quickly, it's a very short sentence. You don't have to bring in war and peace and bring in all this information. You just need to demonstrate that you've got the understanding and the knowledge to make those points throughout your critique, evidence critique, counter critique, okay? And that's how you do it. Okay, any questions on that section on evidence? Oh, one point that I did forget to say on sources, government websites as well. So stats from government, we have the Office of National Statistics in the UK. They're all credible sources. So government websites are also allowable as a source. Okay, any questions, Vicky? And I apologise for the dog barking in the background.
Look, there was one, I believe. So when you were talking about sources right at the beginning, somebody said that in the past, if they were to interview the top management person in their selected organisation, could they use the content of that interview as a source?
So if you've been asked to do some research in your organisation, then potentially, but I would hesitate to use it because we don't know as a marker how credible what they're saying is. Now, if they've been quoted in a publication from your organisation and interviewed in an organisational newspaper or magazine or something like that, internal newsletter, by all means use their quotes. But I would be hesitant from an interview at this level. When you get into kind of level 7 and into PhDs, that's slightly different because that would be part of your research.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, unless it asks for it specifically in the question.
Okay. Also, they've asked in terms of source. Let me just go up a minute because it's gone. So we had. What about LinkedIn? Is it credible since it was published by an organisation? So say, for instance, ABE publish an article, could they reference or use that article as a source if it was published on LinkedIn and it was written by somebody at ABE, maybe as an example, if they're using LinkedIn, because we do that a lot.
So if you have a research article, so if we go back up, that would come under published reports or research, which you've taken off LinkedIn, which is fine. Go back to how reliable is your source? What are the qualifications of the author? Are the sources listed? Is there a reference list or bibliography? It may not be peer reviewed, that's fine, but as long as it's got a reference list. Is the writing objective? Who's the target audience? So the answer to that question is, if you see research on the internet, so go back, publish reports or research, white papers. I write white papers myself. If they have a reference list and a bibliography, and the author is credible, so Vicky, I blow your trumpet here, you're credible, you have a position of responsibility in an academic organisation, you've recently written a paper on open book exams, in fact, that's coming from a credible source. So the answer to that question is yes, but check the reliability, that it's not just an opinion piece.
Yeah. We've got a bit more about elaborating more on websites, but I think you've just really done that in how you've answered there. So like online journals, Forbes, organisation sites, but I think you've answered that question in answering the other one.
If it's the Harvard Business Review, and I mean, even then it's kind of, I wouldn't use it for a PhD, Harvard Business Review, but it's fine for level 4, 5 or 6. If it's Bloomberg, if it's one of the universities, if it's a university publication, then that's slightly different. But if it's, Carrie's blog, possibly not.
We got another one here. Can students source their teachers' notes?
I'm sure your teachers are very credible, but they're probably, they may be referenced. So, but you can't really quote that. It's difficult to quote someone else's notes, really.
So I guess unless they're published and they've published an article that relates to the subject matter, then it's probably a no.
No.
How about YouTube videos from official company website?
Ooh. No, not really. I'd be very hesitant of YouTube videos because it comes back as what's the target audience and what's the objective of the source. Videos tend to be promotional. So it may be that if you're wanting to get some data and they've got little research, so sometimes you get videos with the little research thing down the bottom, don't you? But even then I'd be that to me would be an area I'd rather not go into personally.
We've got another question. What about background information from a company's website, but there's no author?
So organisational publications are fine. That background you can usually find in press releases or in the company's annual accounts, which you will have an author for. Any other questions?
No, that is it. That is it now for this bit.
Oh, right, I've lost my place now. Hang on. Okay, avoiding academic malpractice, plagiarism, collusion, and poor academic practice. It always makes me sad when I spend time marking and then we get the results back and it's less than the people that we've passed because there's some malpractice in there. We do pick malpractice up. And also bear in mind that as an examiner or a marker, I might be marking 100, 200, 300 scripts. I've read it before. If you've copied off someone else, I've probably just read their script. So the likelihood of me picking up plagiarism or collusion is very high. So it's not just relying on the markers. You tend to have, we try and get people marking all of the papers, but we standardize the marking and it's picked up. It does get, we have discussions about this all the time. So it is very sad that you feel the need to, or not you personally, that sounds like I'm accusing you, but people feel the need to cheat, basically. That's what it is, it's cheating. So sometimes plagiarism can happen because you don't realize you're doing it or you don't understand what it is. So basically, do not copy someone else's work ever. Just don't do it. Don't copy it. Make sure if you're putting a quote or copying a piece of text from a textbook or from another article, that you put it in quotation marks and you cite it and you reference it. What you're doing is you're making clear to the marker what you're writing, your voice is, and what is the voice of others. Okay, what other people have said. So this is how I'm explaining it, but this is what someone else said, and I'm quoting that. The referencing helps you to acknowledge the source of your work, and it does help you demonstrate evidence. So there are marks in that, but don't give me pages and pages of quotes, because I can't give you marks for that. Cite the work within your writing, so the author and the date. So Hackman 2002 said, and then add the source to your reference list. And I've given an example of a reference there. So it's important, if you are using someone else's work, that you cite it and you reference it, because that way you're not plagiarizing and you're not copying someone else's work. You are acknowledging that you are using someone's work within your answer to the question. Collusion is still a form of cheating. So even if you're not copying from someone else, it does mean that you've planned a response with someone else, and it's using a plan, a copied plan, or a template to frame your answer. Now, we have had occasions in the past where centres have provided students with a framework of how to answer the question. So in task 2, you need to mention X, Y, and Z, and they've actually given them almost like subheadings, fill in underneath in your own words. The problem with that is when everyone in the centre does it, it becomes really obvious that collusion has taken place. And what's even worse is if you're given the wrong direction and you put the wrong information in or answer the question wrongly, everyone gets it wrong, which is even worse. It's like you're actually you're making a plan to fail together, which is very sad. So don't copy a template. Don't use someone else's framework. Write your own plan, write your own work, and avoid plagiarism by paraphrasing someone else's work. But don't just change words around, because it's still cheating. You know, if you're like, oh, well, you've written the sentence like that, so I'll write it very differently. So I'll use exactly the same thing, but I'll just write it in different words. It still gets picked up. It still gets noticed because the structure's the same. And it does take two to collude. So if you allow someone else to copy your work or to use the framework of your work, and collude with you, you will fail too. So even if you're not the one cheating, if you're the one who's done the work and put all that effort in, if you let someone else copy off you, you will fail too. And that is just, that's criminal, isn't it, really? If someone else has been too lazy to do the work and copy off yours, you failing because of them, oof, that's not something I would be happy with. So don't let other people read your work. Don't give your work to someone else and don't give them the answer, and don't do the work for someone else. Do your own work and leave it at that. Okay, don't collude. Poor academic practice is kind of like that grey area where it may be that you're quite a new student, you're learning how to do these things, you're not quite sure. There may be a low level of duplication, there may be some citations. This might be due to an error or carelessness. You may have meant to put quotation marks in and you didn't, or you've forgotten to do it. But if you're passing off ideas as if they were your own, then you're into poor academic practice. So you need to make sure that you cite and reference quotes. Even if you're synthesizing someone else's ideas, putting it into your own words, make sure you cite that Hackman date says, and put it in your own words. That's fine, but just go back to the fact that it was Hackman's idea, or whoever's idea it was, doesn't have to be Hackman. Acknowledge the reuse of your own work. So I've had the situation where students have gone through their different levels, so level 4, level 5, they get to level 6. They're copying stuff from a previous paper that they've answered maybe 2 levels back. You have to quote your own work. So as an author, I've written 40 odd books. I have to quote myself in my books that I'm writing to avoid plagiarism, to avoid plagiarizing myself. So don't do it. And think about it this way: everything that you write contributes to the wider academic community. So the paper that you write is adding something to the body of knowledge that already exists. So just by answering your paper, you're contributing to the academic community, which is amazing. So don't allow yourself to fall into the trap of cheating, because we value your contribution. So it's not just about passing an exam or an open book exam or an assignment. Actually, you're contributing to academic thinking, which is really exciting. And who knows, one day you might be like me and end up as an academic and write your own books. So it's really good practice. So that's the end of plagiarism. Any questions?
Okay, right. I need to scroll back up a little bit. I think we've got okay, so we've got using Turnitin, ABE's acceptable percentage. We'll follow up after this on that, because we've got that in detail. We've got that in one of our guides, so we'll follow up with it, because I haven't got it open and I would hate to give you the wrong percentages off the top of my head. So we definitely have, and we can share that afterwards. We've got, okay, so in the journal, the author referenced another author. How? I don't know if you can answer that, Carrie.
Okay, so if you're quoting from, so Fred in 2002 quotes Foster in 2015, you can actually say Fred in 2002, referring to Foster 2000, whatever it is, said, da, da, da. So you can do that, or you can just use Fred 2002, that's fine. If you're summarizing what he said and he's got references in there. The best thing to do, the even better thing to do, would be going back to the original paper. So if Fred in 2002 is talking about Foster, then go back to that paper, read that paper, and then quote directly from that and make your own conclusions about what was it that the author was trying to say, because Fred may have misinterpreted or misrepresented what they were saying. So it's always best to go back to the original source. Not always possible, because getting hold of original sources may be more difficult, but best practice, my advice would be always go, if they're quoting someone else, you go, well, that's an interesting point, go back to that author's work. So go back to the original author and read what they said. because it may be misrepresented in someone else's work. They may be utilising it slightly wrongly or representing it wrongly.
Okay, and then we've got, if you use the study guide for guidance but give your own practical structure and example, do you still need to reference the study guide?
Only if it has influenced greatly the point that you're making. So if the study guide has made a point and so for example, I know in the study guide on dynamic and collaborative teams, I wrote it, that there's a lot of stuff about groupthink in there, and there's some information about dysfunctional team. If you're using that, you should really be saying, you know, Foster, whatever date it was, 2019, said da 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 da. Okay, so just cite it, or just put it in brackets, Foster, and the date in closed brackets at the end to show that you've used that. Why is that important? Well, one, it's acknowledging that where the source is. Two, that adds marks because it's evidence that you've read widely and you're not just making it up.
Mm-hmm. We've got another one. Other materials you'd expect to be in the appendix apart from figures and tables?
Nothing.
No. Good.
Yeah, I get some people love using the appendices, and that's fine if you feel that you want to back it up, but for me, unless you're referring to something, so for example, if you've got so one of the things that we may ask for in some of the management ones are, you know, do a pestle analysis. Well, rather than having your pestle analysis in your main body, you might put your full pestle analysis in your appendix and then make reference to it in your task, saying, you know, some information, so you actually get an opportunity to dive deeper into it. That's where it would sit in the appendix, but otherwise, really at this level, you don't need to have loads of appendices unless it's relevant.
We've got do I reference what was referenced? I think you might have answered that one already.
So a simple way is to reference where you got the information, you know, so where you've got the idea from, but otherwise try and go back to the original text, or you can mention the fact that it was somebody else that they were referring to, especially if you're quoting.
Okay, we've got hang on. So appealing to marking the papers, because I tend to do so one picture at a task. This is about them including.
Say that again.
It says, are visuals appealing to you in marking the papers? So I guess that's putting images in.
Personally, no, I don't get anything from visuals. I can't speak for other markers. You may get marks so don't put figures in if you're not going to mention them in the text. So if you're writing, you know, referring to figure 1, blah, 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 don't just put a random picture in and don't refer to it in the text, because it's like, well, why is the picture there? So that's the first thing. I haven't got a problem with you putting pictures in if you want to, and it helps you tell your narrative and make your arguments. But it's not necessary. It doesn't. It only put a visual in if it adds something to the point that you're making, and it needs to be referred to in the text. Otherwise, don't put it in.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got another question. If they put a table in the appendix and then refer to it in the body of their text, the table word count won't count, correct?
Correct.
Yes. I've had a question from Keisha as well about sharing this, because, you know, some classmates will benefit from it because it's really useful. So we're going to be sharing this session because we've recorded it. And I believe we'll also put the share on Facebook as well for those that were streaming live on Facebook. So you should be able to get the recording after the session. It won't be instant, because I do like to go back over it just to check that there's nothing strange that's popped up in the recording that myself or Carrie didn't notice during the session. So within a few days it should be out there. So what else have we got? How many marks will be deducted if we don't reference properly? I mean, that's a difficult one to answer.
We don't deduct marks. at ABE, we award marks. That's the important thing you need to know. We never take marks off you. We only ever give marks to you. So you start at nothing and then we try and give you as many marks as possible. If you don't reference and you have taken someone else's work and you're presenting it as your own, then you're in danger of falling foul of plagiarism and getting no marks and failing for plagiarism and academic malpractice. So it's actually endangering your whole paper if you don't reference properly or cite properly.
And just off the back of that, in our guide to writing assignments and our guide to writing open book exams, there's a whole section on referencing, and there's a whole table full of examples on how to reference from various sources, and we follow the Harvard referencing style. So there's really lots and lots of information. There's also links on our website to effective referencing, links to our command words, which Carrie's referred to during this session. So if you need any additional support with that, it is in all of those resources. But we are thinking about doing a session on, avoiding plagiarism, collusion, correct referencing as well at some point. So, but in the meantime, look in those resources, because it's all in there, and there's lots and lots of examples as well. So that should help when doing this next round of assignments and open book exams.
My advice is, if you're not sure whether you should put a citation, put a citation. It's better to put it and be safe than not put it and then jeopardize your whole paper. And it's 2 words. It's the surname of the author and the date of the publication. And that's all you need to put into your paper as you're writing. So if you're not sure, put it in, because you probably do need to if you're thinking that you should.
Okay. Okay, is this the last assessment window? Oh, somebody's actually drawing on the screen, it would seem.
I know, it's lovely.
Is this the last assessment window for open book exams? We are currently looking at June 2021, and we will be letting everybody know what the assessment method for June 2021 is before the end of October, so everybody will know how to prepare. The reason I haven't got an answer today is just because we're just in the throes of getting this booking window over. It closes soon, so if you haven't booked, please do rush and book after this session, because that window is about to close, and then we will let people know what's happening for June before the end of October, as Ofqual require us to let you know before the end of October. So watch this space is the answer to that. It says, in-text citations, do they contribute to the word count?
Yes.
Okay. Can I use the syllabus as a guide in responding step by step to ensure that I capture the pertinent information towards the question asked?
Yeah, so all the questions are aligned to the syllabus and the learning outcomes. So yes, you can do.
But you need more than just what's in the syllabus.
But you need more, yeah. It's filling in the blanks, really. That's the start point.
Yeah, okay. All right, excellent. I think that's all the questions there, Carrie.
Okay, so my brain hurts. In summary, writing great assignments, open book answers, top tips, there's 7 of them. Answer the question, that's always a good start. Respond to the command word, and hopefully you realise how important those command words really are in terms of determining what information from a topic you need to include. Keep to the point. You don't have to add loads of waffle. Just try and give me enough to give you a mark. That's all I need. So you don't need to kind of go into war and peace. Just make your point and make another point and make another point, and that's how you get your marks. Keep to the word limit, and make sure you allocate word count based on marks per question. Don't write too many for a 10-mark question and not enough for a 30. Quality and quantity of references. So it's all very well having you know, 3 pages of references, that's great. But if the quality of the references are all Wikipedia pages, you probably won't get any better marks than someone who's not put any references at all. So make sure that your references are of good quality. Make sure you synthesize the material into your own words, like munge ideas together and to demonstrate your understanding. Make a clear academic argument. Make sure it's structured. So remember that headline, evidence, critique, counter critique, and then summary. Make sure you've got that structure in place and you tell the story. It's a narrative that you're telling around the topic, and answer the what and why the what is important in the context of your organization. Always, always, always apply to your organization. You do that, you can't go wrong. And I will happily award marks willy-nilly all over your paper if you follow these guidelines, if you like, these top tips.
Okay.
And that's finito.
Is that it? Okay, we've got a few more questions come through, Harry. Okay. So in terms of the referencing, I think when you said when it's in text, they've said, isn't it the author's last name and the letter of their first name and the year in brackets to be put in referencing?
No, in text, in the text itself, just the surname and the date. In the referencing at the end, the bibliography, the references at the end, so the citation is just the surname and the date. At the end, it is everything. It's their surname, their initials, date, publication name. If you put in a website or a link, you need to say when it was accessed, page numbers, all of that needs to go into the references. But in text, the citation is the surname and the date, nothing else.
Okay. We had another question about approaches to strategic questions, but I'm not really sure what that was about. Just trying to go back through and see the original question. So it says, what do you expect from the strategic units?
So strategic thinking is very much about the direction of the organisation, how the organisation is led, what's happening in terms of the outside of the environment, and what's happening in response from the organisation. So the strategic level is quite high level within the organisation. So I would say the expectation, depending on the subject, I can talk about strategic human resource management, is very much around kind of looking at the direction of the organisation and how, so in this case, HR contributes to helping the organisation achieve its strategic objectives.
Okay. So all I'll sort of say around referencing, it's best to go to the guides that I referred to before, because obviously we've got it all laid out in there with all the examples of in-text referencing, as Barry said, referencing in the reference section or bibliography. So please refer to that, and that will give you a really clear guide. So we've done really well for time, Harry. I actually didn't think we'd fill 2 hours, but we are 4 minutes short of filling 2 hours. The Sri Lanka team, IUHS campus, want to express their appreciation to you, Carrie. They've put that in a message there. So if there's no more questions, as I said earlier, we will be sharing this out to our centre contacts, and also the link on Facebook. Let's just see, another one's come in. Facebook say lots and lots of thanks as well. Jörg's been monitoring the Facebook and the comments there. So any questions that have been asked on Facebook, we have taken a note, and we will be following up after the session as well with some of those, because some refer to the finance unit. So we'll be getting back to you separately on that. We've got lots of thanks coming in now, Carrie. Thanks from Myanmar, and a student called Ruth has said thank you. Yeah, Joanna. So lots of thanks coming in. So glad. Oh, and the dog is now saying thank you as well. We're glad you enjoyed the session. As I said, we will be sending these out, and we will be also asking our centres, and students can request as well if there's any additional sessions that they would like us to do. What we can't do is we can't deliver sessions around specific content, but what we can do is we can deliver sessions to our centres and our tutors about what we expect from certain units, and we can deliver sessions like this that are generic around, you know, answering a really good assignment or open book exam question. So we will continue to do these kind of sessions throughout the year, and this will be on our portal as well, so it can be rewatched, the slides can be used, so it'll act as a resource for our centres as well that may want to do a follow-up session with their own students. So these are freely available to our network, our ABE family, to use and to redo with your students if they didn't get the chance to actually watch it today. So massive thanks to Carrie for preparing the session and for delivering it today. It was really interesting, and to be fair, Carrie, you didn't lose numbers as we were going through. I was monitoring the participants. 1 or 2 dropped out, but they did say they had to go. So to hold attention for 2 hours, it must have been a useful session. I'd like to also thank Jurga at head office, who's been in the background monitoring our live Facebook stream and set that up today. So we will be doing more of these. It's, you know, we really enjoy it, and it makes our markers job more of a pleasure, because we know you're going to listen to everything Carrie said, and we're expecting in December to have a really successful session.
100% all across the board, 100 marks for everybody. I'd love it. I'd be so
not going to do that. She's not promising that. I'm just saying that.
But just follow the tips. It'll be brilliant. I'd love to see that uptick. It'll be and I know for all the markers, all the examiners at ABE, we take great delight in having students achieve distinctions, and there's nothing better than finishing your marking session on one of those good papers where you go, "God, that was a good paper. I really enjoyed reading that." So yeah, we get delight out of reading good answers. So
okay, brilliant. Okay, well,